They say death is the end of a journey. For me, it was just the beginning of a new one, and I was supposed to walk that path alone. Or so I thought. My name's Rory, or at least that's what my friends called me. Friends? Well, they were long gone. It was just me and my final trip. A journey with cancer, destined to end in a lonely cabin high in the mountains. Peacefully, alone, to die. I thought I had everything figured out, every contingency planned. But fate, it seems, had other ideas. Or perhaps, this wasn't about death at all, but life. And then, I found her. Lost in a raging blizzard, utterly alone, almost lifeless. She was just an unexpected detour on my final journey. New. Seeing her stirred something in me, something I thought I'd long buried. That part of me that wanted to help, that couldn't just drive by. I got her inside the camper. Her eyes held a deep, profound fear. And her wrists, they had marks, like she'd been bound. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. Wheel peels rizdiri. She knocked. I went back into the camper. She was in my clothes, sleeves and pant legs rolled up. And her belly, it was noticeably distended. She looked better, but that fear was still palpable. And the clothes were clearly too big for her. I offered her a rope for a belt, trying to be helpful. But she recoiled, her eyes wide with terror, backing into a corner. Her fear was real. And those marks, they painted a grim picture of where she'd come from. It made me wonder what kind of hell she'd escaped. She put her old, dirty clothes into a trash bag. A quiet gesture, almost a mutual understanding passing between us. I asked if she was ready to go. She looked at me, a grim determination on her pale features. She just said, "Away from here." We drove on, and as daylight grew I saw her more clearly. She was so pale, her hair a strange mix of silver and gold. And those marks on her wrists and ankles, like she'd been bound for a long, long time. And that fear in her eyes. Anger flared in me. A deep, cold fury. But I had to suppress it. She needed to heal. Maybe then she would tell me what had happened. Heifer. I tried to make small talk, to get her to open up. I offered my name and asked for hers. She seemed confused by the concept of a name. She tried to say it, a series of unusual, almost alien sounds. I tried to repeat them, grimacing, then offering a simpler one. Ilara. She considered it, then nodded, accepting it. We shook hands. Her hand felt strange, different, but I couldn't dwell on it then. We had a storm to contend with. My fee. Suddenly, she cried out, her face turning green, urgency in her voice. I braked hard. She opened the door and vomited into the snow. I offered her water and napkins, reassuring her that morning sickness was common in pregnancy. The gratitude in her eyes as she took the water. It was as if kindness was a foreign concept to her. In that moment, I realized this journey wasn't just about my own end anymore. The Mountain Man and the Star Child, Part 2. The drive stretched on, hours blurring into a slow, steady crawl through the endless storm. Outside, the world was a swirling canvas of white, but inside the truck, a different kind of storm was brewing in Rory. The pain was relentless, tightening its grip, each throb a stark reminder of the clock ticking down. He'd been palming his meds, trying to keep the beast at bay, but he knew he couldn't take enough to truly escape it, and still stay behind the wheel. Usually he'd just pull over, take what he needed and rest. But not with her here, not with Ilara. They had warned him about withdrawals, but honestly, in his situation, it felt like the least of his worries. Still, the tremors in his hands were growing, a telltale sign that his body was giving up the fight. He had to stop. Ilelatai controls. He pulled the truck off the road, the tires crunching softly in the fresh snow, and headed back to the camper. The heater sputtered to life, a small comfort in the vast, cold expanse. By the time he'd set up, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely manage the small pill bottle. It felt like shards of glass were tearing through him, each movement a fresh agony. He poured out several pills, counted them, added one more and swallowed them dry, a grim routine he'd mastered over the past few months. He had to explain it to her, to Ilara. He couldn't hide this from her. He was going to sleep, for a long while. He hoped she wouldn't be gone when he woke up, storm or no storm. His mind swam with plans, old ones, new ones, constantly shifting, but they all converged on one thing. Ilara. What about Ilara? Then, the drugs took hold, pulling him into a heavy dark sleep. When he woke, it was slow, painful. A hammer pounded behind his eyes, and his body felt like it had been run over by a truck. But, strangely, it was an improvement. He groaned, sitting up, cradling his throbbing head. One hell of a hangover, he thought, with absolutely no fun involved. She was there, watching him, her concern, a palpable thing in the quiet cabin. She wasn't asking, she was stating a fact. He nodded. He tried to lie, to say it would be okay, but even he didn't believe it. He clarified, saying it would be okay for now. She came to his side, her small hand gentle on his cheek. He covered her hand with his, grateful for the simple affection, the unexpected warmth. Then he felt it. A jolt, like a light electric shock, not unpleasant but definitely there. It lasted only a few seconds before she pulled her hand away. She repeated her observation, but this time, her voice was tinged with deep sadness, the kind words couldn't fully express, and she added, "Not long." How did she know? He wondered. But then, it hit him. They were in this together. She deserved to know. He had to tell her. He confessed his secret, his terminal diagnosis. Cancer. Metastatic. 6 months, maybe less. He watched her face, searching for understanding, but her expression remained unchanged, a profound sorrow fixed in her eyes. And for some reason, that upset him more than his own impending death. He had planned to spend his last spring in a cabin up here, in peace and beauty. So much for that. This late winter storm, however, hadn't been a surprise. He'd bought this truck for extreme conditions, outfitted it for a one-way trip. The cabin, bought from an old friend, forgotten by most, was ready. Fixed up, stocked, even an escrow account set up for after he was gone. He'd wanted no worries, no fuss. Now, it seemed, even those last few weeks of peace might be denied. He pushed those thoughts aside. He was a goner, sure, but if he could help her, that would be more worthwhile than his selfish plan to die alone and miserable. Later, back in the truck, he pulled out the atlas. An X marked a spot, the cabin. They'd passed its turn-off a while ago, about 8 miles up a valley. On the lee side of the mountains, so perhaps the road would be passable. Calling the forgotten track a road was a stretch. Passable was hopeful thinking. He showed her the map, then pointed to the closest town. People there could help her, he thought. Sixton, he gave her the choice. Town, with people, police, doctors, everything she needed. Or the cabin, food, shelter, enough for her to last the summer. Then the truck, and freedom. He knew what he'd choose, and surprisingly, so did she. Her finger went straight to the X. Cabin, she said. No people. He nodded, a sense of understanding dawning on him. He didn't have solid proof, but it was clear she was different. And she'd been hurt, deeply mistreated. She mistrusted people, especially uniforms. He didn't know the details, but he would do his best in his remaining time to help her. Giving her the choice, whether it turned out good or bad, wouldn't be his problem. And that, he realized with a grunt, made doing the right thing a lot simpler. Okay, cabin it is, he said. First, though, he had to work on the truck. Get the tire chains on. Failure wasn't an option in his original plan, but unexpected rescues hadn't been factored in. He needed to ensure they had every chance. Putting on the chains was grueling. Jacking up the truck, wrestling the heavy metal over the massive off-road tires. It took everything out of him. She followed him around, watching, occasionally handing him a tool. She couldn't do much, but she anticipated his needs with uncanny accuracy. He noticed that. She seemed intelligent, learning quickly. He'd only had to show her something once, and she could do it. He made a decision. She'd need to know how eventually anyway. As they got back into the cab, he pointed to the driver's door. He pointed to the driver's seat. She looked at him quizzically. He asked if she knew how to drive. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Well, about time you learnt then," he replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. The storm was finally easing, and with the chains on, she'd have far more control. Besides, they didn't have the luxury of waiting for a better opportunity. She buckled into the driver's seat. He secured himself in the passenger side and began his lesson. He knew she'd been watching him drive with interest. He hoped she'd been paying better attention than he expected. He kept his instructions simple, assuming her English wasn't perfect. The throttle was the tall pedal on the right, the brake the square one. Park, reverse, drive. Lower gears for hills and bad roads. The wheel for direction. It would be slippery, so slow turns, careful movements. If they slid, turn into the slide, pump the brakes. She nodded, focusing intently on where he pointed. "Mile." He asked if she was ready. She looked at him, and he swore he saw a faint, almost smile. A mix of excitement and nervousness, just as he'd expected. He'd taught his own kids how to drive. This wasn't much different. Except for the storm, the mountains, and the potentially catastrophic consequences of an accident. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Let's go." She managed to turn the truck around, a 5-point maneuver that gave her a good feel for the controls. Once on a straight section, he had her slam the brakes, letting the truck slide as the chains dug in. She learned fast. He shifted his attention to the map, searching for the turnoff. Even so, they almost missed it. Off the main highway, each successive fork in the road made it clearer no one had been this way in a long time. The chains worked well enough through the drifts, occasionally digging in, finding purchase in the deep snow or frozen earth. He tracked their progress on the map, compensating for the lack of landmarks by using the odometer, knowing it wasn't perfectly accurate due to wheel slippage, but it was all they had. He figured they had about a mile or so to go. The road had shrunk to a narrow track, now an overgrown path. They had to avoid occasional trees that had encroached on the right-of-way. The eroded dual ruts were barely visible through the snow, which also hid occasional boulders and other obstructions they crossed with effort. Perhaps half a mile left, he thought, looking forward to rest, a warm fire, and a hot meal. Actually, he could skip the meal. He felt terrible. But they were too close to stop. He said nothing, the familiar pains building again. He glanced at her, both hands on the wheel, focused. She was doing well, but looked tired. She caught his gaze and offered one of her odd half-grins. Not quite a smile, but getting closer. At this point, he was just glad she found any enjoyment in her circumstances. They'd gone another quarter mile or so when they hit the stream. It wasn't much of a stream, more a wet line across the road. Late spring conditions had melted the ice, leaving a deceptively shallow but wide flow across their path. Unaware of the hazard, she drove right into it. The truck slowed, sinking into the mud. She hit the accelerator, then harder. The engine roared, power to the wheels. Before he realized what was happening, before he could shout, "No!" the truck's front end was mired up to the differential. He hadn't noticed the risk either. He'd been slumped against the window, eyes closed, battling the pain and his worsening condition. They switched seats. She slid to the passenger side. He walked around to the driver's side. The snow wasn't deep here, but the flowing stream had kept the mud unfrozen. The wheels were up to the hubs in something that looked like chocolate pudding. Sticky clay. Great, he thought. He tried every trick, rocking the truck, twisting the wheel, low gear. The vehicle remained stubbornly unmoving. Finally, he shut it off. He told her they were walking the rest of the way. She bowed her head, guilt evident in her whispered, "Sorry." "Hey, no worries, kid," he said, trying for a light tone. "It's not far, and it's a nice day for a walk." She looked up, searched his face, saw his smile, and nodded. He went back to the camper, grabbed a backpack. Not far, he figured, but they should be prepared. A blanket, water bottles, some food, the first aid kit. He hefted it. Not heavy, but heavier than he should be carrying. It was the bare minimum for a walk through the snowy mountains alone. He grabbed a spare coat and put it on Alara. She was painfully thin, and he wasn't sure she'd stay warm even with the effort. She looked worn out again, as if the driving had drained her. Nothing he could do about that. He shrugged. They set off down the path, towards the cabin's promise of warmth and food. He led the way. Snow depth varied greatly. At times he broke through deep drifts so she could keep up. He shuffled his feet, clearing as much path as possible. Even so, she fell behind. He paused, waiting. In truth, he needed the rest too, but he was terrified he wouldn't be able to keep going. If he stopped, they stopped. And they died, right there. Effin. He encouraged her, saying it wasn't far now. She caught up, exhausted. Tired, she said. Too tired. Her face was drawn, almost as pale as when he first met her. Tam, he thought. Polomol, Koloji's neighbor. Okay, come here, I'll help you. It's not far now. Soon, a warm cabin and hot food. He put her arm over his shoulders, taking on as much of her weight as he could. She was surprisingly light. In his prime, he'd have carried her. He cursed his condition. Anger is good, he thought. Maybe it'll give me the edge I need. Teknla. The cabin was farther than he'd thought. That half-mile was closer to 2. When they staggered up to the front door, he leaned her against the porch rail. He cleared snow, forced the door open. Inside, he set her on a chair. He was at the end of his rope. The pain was almost gone, replaced by a leaden heaviness. He knew that wasn't good. He was running on fumes. He pushed through, knowing she needed warmth to survive. Malol. The people he'd paid to set up the place had done well. Wood and kindling were ready. The cabin was clean. He got a fire going quickly. There was a bunk against one wall. He took off her coat and put her on it. She was soaked, but the fire and warmth seemed to be helping. She sat on the edge of the bunk wrapped in a blanket. Hoji. He was relieved. They'd made it. Safe. For a time anyway. Then the room began to spin. He sat heavily in the overstuffed armchair by the fire, struggling to breathe. Oh no, he thought. He looked at her. He'd done his best. He hoped it was enough. He told her they made it, then, with profound apology, that he wouldn't be able to help her much more. He was done. But she had everything she needed. She would be safe. Each breath was a supreme effort. Talking was agony. He felt like lead, his vision fading. One last adventure, indeed. At least he'd gotten her to the cabin, given her a fighting chance. That thought brought a small comfort. It would have been nice to see that baby come into the world, he thought. The last thing he saw in the firelight was her coming across the room, leaning very close. Her mouth opened, wide, incredibly wide, and darkness took him. The Mountain Man and the Star Child, Part 3. He was pretty sure something was wrong. He felt pretty bad, but it was better than he'd felt in a long time, which was confusing, as he was pretty sure he shouldn't be feeling anything. Slowly, he came to the realization he wasn't dead. Damn, he thought. I ought to be. Heck, I was. Better silly. He opened his eyes. Ilara had fallen across his chest, her head resting just below his left shoulder, her arms draped off either side of the chair. The blanket had fallen from her shoulders, but still covered most of both of them. His voice was a dry croak as he tried to speak, once, then again. He nudged her, but she didn't move. He sat up slowly, cradling her in his arms. She didn't respond at all. He touched her neck, looking for a pulse, and her head tilted back, her mouth opened. He almost dropped her to the floor when he saw the inside of her mouth. No time for that, he thought, pushing the shock away. He crossed over to the bunk and gently laid her down. She was cold as ice, but although it was hard to see, her chest still rose and fell. Oh, thank God, he thought, a wave of relief washing over him. My forte. He pondered what to do. He had to get her warmed up at least. Her clothes were still wet. He was pretty sure she wouldn't have liked the idea, but he had no choice. He began pulling the cold, wet clothes off of her. He paused, surprised at what he saw, discovering just how different she was. While she looked like a human female, she clearly wasn't. She was female, or close enough, but she lacked breasts for one thing. Something he'd initially attributed to her being young and undernourished, but it was an anatomical difference. No scars either. As he positioned her under the blankets, he noticed that her knee joint bent equally in both directions, and her feet were, well, different. She was close enough to pass as human in a crowd. There were subtle differences, but ones she could hide at least. He was greatly curious, and wanted to give her a more thorough examination, but he realized she deserved her privacy. He stifled his curiosity and covered her with another blanket, and then a comforter. She almost disappeared in the bed. He needed to get her warmed up, but how? He looked around. The fire had burned down to coals, glowing red in the fireplace. That gave him an idea. He found a saucepan in the kitchen, took it to the fireplace, and started scooping hot coals and ash into it. He put the lid on and touched the side. Hot, but not too hot. Good. He went to the bunk and slid the pan full of coals under the blanket. He kept it moving, up and down along the length of the bed, gradually warming the bed and her. When the heat from the pan diminished enough that he wasn't concerned about fire or burning her, he wrapped part of the blanket around it and left it next to her under the covers. A little color had returned to her face, and he felt encouraged. He went to the kitchen next. Soup, he was thinking. Or broth, or tea. At this point, even hot water if he could get her to drink it. As long as he could keep her going. Fall off. He found bouillon cubes and boiled some water, dissolving them in it. He let it cool enough to be able to drink and brought it over to her. He gently rubbed her arms and legs to get circulation back into them. He put a hot cloth on her forehead and held her cheek. He spoke to her, gentle but insistent, asking if she was still with him. Her eyes opened. She looked at him. He told her she had saved him. She nodded. He held the cup up to her, offering the hot broth. She drank some, then lay back and closed her eyes. He asked how he could help her. All of his experience had been with humans, and she was clearly something different. Her faint voice replied, asking for food, saying she was hungry. He was glad. Here, at least, this request he could deal with. He offered soup or toast, thinking light and easy to start, to get her strength back slowly. No, she said, alive. She paused. He asked if she meant raw or uncooked food. No, she repeated, alive. Need food alive. He pondered this, suspicions forming in his mind, but he held them in check. She was helpless and had not hurt him when he lay unconscious, close to death. At least, he owed her one. He asked, like a live animal? She nodded. Yes, she said, her face twisted in a pain. Emotional or physical, he couldn't tell. His mind raced. Where the heck was he going to find some alive food animals in this area? How would he get them back to the cabin still alive, and do that before she got worse? Still, he would try. She'd saved his life, and he'd committed to helping her. Just how she would consume a live animal concerned him, but he pushed that to the back of his mind. He told her he would try to find her some alive food. She nodded, closing her eyes and laying her head back onto the pillow. Just how I'm going to do that, I have no idea, he thought. He grabbed his coat and went outside. He'd hunted and fished a lot of his life. He knew the woods, knew the animals. His experience in combat, in survival, would all come down to naught unless he could find something, even just a squirrel maybe. He got a lucky break when he went around the back of the cabin. There was an old 50-gallon drum there that was used to burn trash. Whoever had cleaned out the cabin for him hadn't bothered to burn anything, and the old boxes and bags of ancient expired food they'd thrown out had become a buffet for some of the local animals. He looked around and found a set of tracks, a raccoon, and a good-sized one. He followed them, the fresh snow making that simple. A few hundred yards into the woods, the tracks ended at a tree. He walked around the tree, looking up, until he saw it. An opening in the trunk where an old branch had been lost, and the wood had rotted, leaving a hole. He knew the raccoon had made that hole its den, and it was still in there. Not believing his luck, he headed back to the cabin, a plan quickly forming in his head. It would require a bit more luck, but he felt he could make it work. It was all he had anyway. More luck. At the cabin he found what he needed, an old rag, some twine, and the lighter he'd used to start the fireplace. He took these outside. He found a long, forked branch, hoping it was long enough to reach the hollow. Back at the tree he looked around. There was still only one set of tracks. Good, it's still in the tree. He took the old dish rag and set fire to it. Once it was burning well, he blew out the flames. The charred cloth was smoking strongly. Perfect, he thought. He used the forked stick to toss the smoking bundle of cloth into the hole in the tree, and got ready. He'd only get one shot. It was do or die. A few seconds later, he heard scrabbling in the tree. The head of a large raccoon came out of the hole. It clawed its way out of its smoking den, blinded by smoke. He swung the branch as hard as he could. His aim was good, and he caught the animal just behind the shoulder. He heard a meaty snap, and knew he'd done some damage. The force of the blow launched the raccoon off the tree into the snow, where it scrabbled, blinded by pain and smoke. He used the forked end of the stick to pin its head, and relying on his winter gloves for protection, he grabbed it by the back of the neck. He took the twine he'd brought and looped it over the muzzle. The animal's growling and hissing diminished, as it was forced to breathe through its nose. It was a struggle, and his coat was torn in a few places, but he got the raccoon hogtied in the end. Alive food, she'd said. Well, it's alive and angry, he thought. Massa. He brought his catch back to the cabin. Before he went inside, he paused. Something else had been weighing heavily on his mind, and he had to make another plan, just in case. He worked at the propane tanks he'd seen while exploring earlier. It took him some time, but when he was done he nodded, and then brought the raccoon into the cabin and showed it to her. He hoped this was what she meant. He would feel a little guilty at his mistreatment of the animal if it was not what she needed. She nodded. He brought the trussed-up animal over to her and placed it on the bed next to her. She took it into her hands, despite its stressed attempts to bite and scratch. She told him not to look. He wasn't sure of her reasons. Maybe for her, eating was private, like using the bathroom was for him. Maybe she was ashamed, or maybe she had other, darker reasons. It didn't matter. He turned away and pretended to read the titles of some books on a shelf across the room. There was a picture on the wall, over the bookshelf. He looked at her faint reflection in the glass, and he saw her stare at the animal for a few moments. He heard the raccoon's breathing and muffled growls become quiet. It had calmed down considerably, looking at her. Then he saw her mouth open wide, very wide, and he looked away. He thought he'd hear a meaty crunch as she ate the raccoon, but instead, he heard a soft wet noise. Then nothing. The soft wet noise again. He waited. "Thank you," she said. He turned. The animal now lay very still. He didn't need to check it to see it was dead. He knew. He didn't see a mark on it, at least no new ones. He approached her, carefully. He asked if she was okay now. She nodded. "Yes, okay," she said. He nodded too. He pointed to the raccoon, unsure of how to describe it, asking how often she needed to do this. She looked at him, then turned away, her eyes downcast. "Not often, but," she put her hands on her stomach, "need more now, and after so much hard work." He understood. The stress of pregnancy, coupled with the physically demanding past few days, had nearly starved her to death. Everything had to eat. Her food was just something different than he was used to. He thought for a moment. There were things he needed to know, and soon. He asked as gently as he could, carefully watching her, about the truck driver they had found. Was he food too? She sobbed and turned away. He recognized the crying from that first night together. He let her cry. He was pretty sure it was real, and her feeling guilt was important right now. When she was ready, she turned towards him, but couldn't look him in the eye. She explained that she had been desperate, with no choice. She had not wanted him to die, but he was so weak, near death, and she needed, her baby needed. He died. She was sorry, she didn't want him to. And you were starving by that point too, I bet, he thought. He pushed that thought out of his head and asked if she could feed and not kill. This was a critical point. He needed to know, was she a killer or something else? He tried to clarify, could she feed from alive things and not kill them? It was important. Yes, take what's needed, let it grow back, no harm, she said. I eat dead food too, but occasionally need the live food, I don't know why. He breathed a sigh of relief. He was confident she wasn't lying. She'd had the opportunity to kill him and live happily ever after, and she had chosen to save him instead, at the risk of her own life. So she wasn't some vicious vampiric monster, just another living thing that relied on other living things for its existence. It seemed like she used other living things as supplements. If what she said was true, she could harvest what she needed without damaging the donor. He could work with that. Heck, it was better than all the steaks he'd eaten in his life, he supposed. Still, he was curious about something else. He asked how she had helped him then. His curiosity and gratitude mixed. She looked at him. Mothers can feed babies and others. I fed you, you got strong and you won't die, she said. Indeed, he hadn't died. It was pretty close, he thought, but in fact he felt better than he had in months. Still, he pressed her a bit more. He asked why she had saved him, given she had the cabin and everything she needed, and he thought saving him almost killed her. She looked at him a very long time before she answered. You were kind to me, cared about me, not about what I was, or what I could do for you. I didn't want that to end, she said. You are good, she said. A good man. He nodded. Maybe a good deed gets rewarded after all, or maybe this good deed's punishment was going to be a whopper. He wasn't sure yet. He stated that she wasn't human, and asked what she was and where she came from. I'm me, she said. I don't know why I am like me. When I was young we were taken. I think many died. I was always in a room or cage. People came, starved me, then they fed me, watched, used machines on me. She shuddered and paused. He let her gather herself. Eventually I escaped, ran through the snow, and you found me. He nodded. There was a lot more to that story, but he felt she'd covered enough, and he'd wait until she was ready to share the rest. He asked if she could show him how she ate, holding out his hand to her. She looked shocked, or horrified. But he was determined. He had to be absolutely sure, and there was only one way to test her, and it had to be quickly. He sniffed. He thought he could smell gas. He pleaded with her. She said he would be afraid of her, that he would hate her, like the others. No, I won't, he replied. I've seen far worse things in my time, and they called themselves human, heroes even. Please, I need to know, it's important. And soon, he thought, we don't have much time. Finally, she nodded. He thought she looked as frightened as he felt, but he was determined not to show fear, for his sake as much as for hers. Her mouth opened, then opened wider, more than a human mouth would. He could see her teeth. The front looked normal, but some of the ones behind were hooked, like a snake. Then, from inside her mouth, a tube extended. That is what he'd seen when she was unconscious in his arms. It reminded him of a long, skinny sea anemone, like he'd seen at some aquarium. The tube extended, making the wet sound he'd heard earlier. He held his arm out to her, and the appendage stretched. He couldn't tell if she was controlling it, or if it had the ability to seek out prey on its own. Then the soft tendrils touched the skin on the inside of his wrist, gently. Then, they seemed to stick. He felt a slight feeling like a mild electric shock. He suddenly felt a bit tired, as if he'd run up a flight of stairs or something. Then the contact broke, and she retracted the appendage and her mouth closed. He looked at his wrist. The distinct flowery mark was there. He rubbed it. He felt fine, though maybe a bit winded. It was passing even as he rubbed his wrist. She looked at him, curious because he had a smile on his face, though she didn't know why. He told her he'd be right back. She nearly panicked, trying to get out of the bunk, but he reassured her. He just had to turn something off. He left on. He promised he'd be right back. He was relieved. He knew she was something very different, alien maybe, but he had had no idea if she was a threat. if he was helping a species of vampire-like aliens or what. So he came up with another plan, a failsafe. If he was wrong about her, and she fed on him, killing him, the open gas line he had left on while they talked would have eventually filled the cabin. The resulting explosion would have killed her, while he would have already been dead. Now that he was confident that she had told the truth, or enough of it to satisfy him, he wouldn't need his improvised dead man switch. He shut off the gas. He would have to repair the line later, when he found some tools. He returned to the cabin still smiling. He opened a window near the kitchen which helped the gas smell dissipate, and busied himself making some food. All in all, he thought, this called for a bit of a celebration. YouTube script, The Mountain Man and the Star Child, Part 4. It was a bright, sunny June morning, a fine day. There were some changes at the cabin on the mountain. Rory had built a shed to hold a few goats and a cow they had bought. A few chickens pecked at things in the yard. The truck was parked next to the cabin. They'd had to wait weeks for things to dry out enough for them to get it out of the creek, but they had. It was useful for the occasional trips Rory made into town. Vägen Talostrokoe, the baby had come in its own time, as babies do. Rory had helped with the delivery, and there'd been a few surprises due to the differences in Ilara's anatomy, but nothing fatal for any of them. He was glad of that, since he'd had no idea what to do if trouble had occurred. Ilara had not let him hold the child, because, she explained, babies get very hungry, and lack control. She fed the baby a combination of dead food that she prepared herself, and live food that she consumed first, then transferred to her baby through her appendage. She let him watch this once, and it was a tender, loving time between the mother and child. It might have been that which finally completely convinced him he had done the right thing. She had had to help him a couple more times. His cancer had been determined to win, but somehow, now that she was stronger and more capable, Ilara had learned how to isolate the rampant, growing tumors. She fed on those, siphoning the life out of them, and she had provided him with occasional feedings to keep him going while his body cleansed itself. He was pretty sure that she had cured him, or close enough. He felt better than he had in years. Pisholoi. They lived, and they did well, and if Rory occasionally noticed small, flower-shaped marks on the cow or goats, he said nothing. Indeed, it didn't bother him at all. The animals didn't seem to be adversely affected in any way. In fact, they were very healthy, and he suspected that she used her talents to keep them that way, as she'd done for him. It was a symbiotic relationship in which she seemed dedicated to the preservation of life. Down in the valley, the townsfolk were a decent sort. Friendly and minded their own business. If some old man and his daughter wanted to live up in the mountains, it was no business of theirs. There were occasional rumors, of course, like when Rory came to town to pick up a delivery of large boxes. Some damn fool said they were boxes of diapers. People had a good gossip about that, but what would that eccentric old coot need diapers for? Like everything else, soon enough there was another topic that came along for them to gossip about, and people moved on. Life up on the mountain was good. Arjuli. Ilara rarely talked about her past, and Rory never pried into it. He discovered that she was much older than she looked. Her thin frame and small size made her look like a human adolescent, but she was well over 30 years old. How old exactly, she didn't know, but she remembered 30 years at least. She thought that was young for her people, but wasn't sure. The few parts of her past she talked about were enough to make his blood boil. Tales of kidnapping, torture, experiments and abuse as governments and others tried to rip the secret of transferring life from one being to another, the key to immortality, from her by any means necessary. That was how she had become pregnant. Her captors had found a male of her species, and surgically accomplished what they wanted. The male dissipated after that, and she never saw him again, never having even been able to talk to him. What her captors hadn't realized was that pregnancy had also changed her. She became determined to escape, to do whatever it took. The life inside her would never know the horrors she'd experienced. Her captors realized too late their mistake, and she made sure they would never have an opportunity to repeat it. Once out of the isolated compound, she had struggled through the mountains in the bitterest winter conditions, alone, freezing and starving, until Rory had found her along the road that night. How far she'd come, or where the place was, she couldn't tell. Life was good for them up on the mountain. After a long discussion, Rory had decided, and on one of his trips into town, he'd made phone calls. Now there was a trust set up, and the cabin was to be kept in trust for her and her children, even after he was gone. He'd set things up so that their modest financial needs would be met by the income from the investments held in trust. They would at least be secure financially. She wouldn't have to worry about having to leave, ever, and he felt good about that. Elara's command of English had improved greatly, and Rory had taught her to read. She learned at a rapid pace. She was already reading through the bookshelf in the cabin. He had also picked up some of her language, though he still struggled with it, his attempts occasionally resulting in peals of laughter from her. Still, he was confident that if necessary, she could risk a trip into town and easily pass herself off as a human, and he could maybe get a few words of her language understood if he needed. There was one thought that persistently came back to him. Where were her people? Had they all been captured, killed, or did some live in hiding, as they did? Was there a community where her child and she would be safe? Even though she had come to love him, as a mentor, even as a father, he was still an alien to her, and she was often aware of being utterly alone, even here. He had heard her crying on rare nights, the odd noises no less sad for their alien sound. In the mornings after, he never asked, and she pretended it hadn't happened. But he'd come to love her too, so he'd made other calls, directing resources and making discreet inquiries. His contacts and resources had found leads, rumors, and stories. Finally, he felt it might be time he went down off the mountain again. One day she drove him down the mountain, and she went back up, just her and her son. She waited, if not patiently, then hopefully, worrying, afraid, excited, all in turn, until the day he came home to the mountain, tired, hungry, and injured, but not alone. Many years passed, and the cabin on the mountain grew into a house. The shed had become a barn. Little children played in the yard around the house, while older ones and adults worked at the things a farm needed done to keep it up. They were tall, slender people, and some wore wool knit hats, which covered their ears, despite the warm summer air. They talked as they worked, some in English, some in a lilting musical language. He'd gone down off the mountain again, and found a few more of her people. A few had found their way to them, using clues he'd left in his travels. The little tribe grew larger. There had been births, there had been deaths, but they were together, and safe. There were alien, the oldest he had rescued had confirmed that, and that they had ended up here on Earth, through a series of unfortunate events. Marooned on a world populated with billions of hostile, primitive aliens, except for one good man. He had been around a long time now. People in town saw him rarely, and only knew him as the old man, a hermit that lived up on the mountain. They liked him. He was kind and helped people in need. They were a little afraid of him too. He had a bit of a reputation. A few years back, some teenagers had snuck up to his place on the mountain. They came back terrified, telling tales of monsters and ghosts. The next day, some folks went up the mountain to see for themselves. It was mostly curiosity. No one had been up to the house on the mountain in recent memory. When they got there, the old man was sitting on the porch in a rocker. He explained that he was rather tired, as some hooligans had been in his barn and upset his cows last night, and he'd had to run them off. After a few glasses of iced tea on the porch, everyone left. They figured the boys were telling tales to cover their misdeeds. What no one saw was that when everyone had left him, the old man hopped up out of the rocker, hopped over the railing, and walked over to the trees, all of his apparent feebleness gone. He called out, and people started walking out of the woods, back to the house, safe again. Borgodre. The townsfolk in the valley also knew that if someone was sick in town and the old man heard about it, he'd give them advice to leave the windows open on a moonlit night, and the clear mountain air would make them healthy. He said it was great for their health and had kept him going all these years. People scoffed, just an old man's stories, but when they followed his advice, they got better too. Long years passed, and still, they would see the old man come to town in his antique truck. They knew he was old, but just how old, no one could say. There were stories, of course, but whether it was the pure mountain air or clean living, like he told the townspeople when they asked, or the fact that he was loved and had found happiness and a state of grace up on the mountain, no one knew.